everyone, and welcome to this webinar. It's so nice to see so many of you here, and I am extremely pleased and excited to have this conversation with Angie Leek, one of our instructors for our 12-month psychedelic education and training program, Vital. So in case you haven't yet heard of Vital, you're going to hear a bunch about it during this call, because we are launching our third cohort on the 23rd of January, and the applications are still open. So if you are interested in gaining a very comprehensive overview of psychedelics, becoming psychedelically literate practitioner, bringing your practice to the next level by learning about harm reduction and integration, then Vital might be the training program for you. And we're going to touch upon it multiple times during this discussion. But today we have our instructor, Angie Leek, who has been with us since the very beginning. Angie is a therapist specializing in marriage and couples therapy. And she is also, you do ketamine therapy as well. And you have been in this sort of mentorship role for quite some time now in the psychedelic space. So what we really wanted to talk about today is, how does one find their path in the field of psychedelics as a practitioner, but also as somebody who's a non-practitioner? What are the sort of essential skills and ways to network, to grow in the field, and to gain the right kinds of the capacities to thrive? And also, once you are in a specific role working with psychedelics and working in a healing profession especially, how do you continue to look after yourself as well as for your own clients? So this whole time we will really welcome interaction from the chat. So if you want to ask questions during the presentation as general, you can pop it in the Q&A box, or you can put it in the chat. I won't guarantee that your questions get answered immediately, but we will try to get to everybody's question towards the end. And so just to brief, I also realized I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Johanna Hilla, and I'm the coordinator of education and training here at Vital. So I run the program. I do a lot of the organizational stuff and the program development and planning and lots of admin. But I also teach. I have a background in Jungian psychology and in religious studies, so I teach more about depth psychological perspectives during the course as well, and I'm also one of the instructors. So Angie, I'm going to hand it over to you to give us a little bit more of a sort of in-depth introduction to yourself, and I would be especially very curious to hear sort of what were the main hallmarks for you as you were finding when you first encountered psychedelics, and then also like how have you built your career around this and come to a place where you are now?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Johanna. It's great to be here and super excited for all the people listening and curious about this topic. So I'll just start and rein me in if I get rambly or whatever. But where do I start? Let me edit one piece of my bio. First of all, I don't specialize in working with couples. I am trained as a marriage family therapist and also a licensed professional counselor. I see couples occasionally. Mainly I work with individuals. Mainly I work with people that are doing psychedelics. 20 years ago, I could never have imagined that this is what I would get to do every day and get paid for. So it's quite a wonderful honor. It's super exciting. I love what I do. It's taken me a long time to get here, and it's been worth every step of the way. I also will own my bias. Like, I'm a therapist and I chose to go through this licensure clinical route for the reasons I did. There are so many other ways to be involved, and it's just continuing to go in that direction. So for those of you who are therapists, great. For those of you who aren't, great. There are so many ways to be involved. Whatever you're doing, it could probably be useful somewhere in the psychedelic ecosystem. So partly how I started was my own teenage psychedelic experience. it's like, wow, what is this? And changes how I make sense of everything. Part of what got me into this was my own wounded healing journey and my struggle or efforts to make sense of suffering and living a life worth meaning. And bumping up against a lot of problems in our existing healthcare system. So the medical model of mental health care, the for-profit model of mental health care. It's great to have modern medicine sometimes. There's a lot that they don't get about psychiatry and psychology and cosmology and how we make sense of being in the world and how we suffer and how we live through it. So that led me to study transpersonal psychology at CIS. I went there in 1999 before their psychedelic program. I studied specifically spiritual emergency, and again, based on my own personal experience with going through that and just wanting to make more meaning out of what that was. Then I was like, well, I need a job. Okay, I guess I'll get licensed. What does that even mean? I don't even know. That's how I ended up with an MFT. I didn't plan to be a family therapist. That was the license type that came with my program in California at the time. And I do like working with systems and with couples, but yeah, but like today, 20 years later, maybe I would have gone to South America and trained with shamans. I don't know. I didn't really know that that was an option for me then. And maybe I walked the path exactly as I needed to. But again, there are lots of other options now. And I think we're at this tipping point where psychedelics are getting ready to come back into our healthcare systems, our social systems, our religious systems. And you don't have to go through any specific channel unless that's your path.
If I may ask, sort of when you mentioned this, that you could have seen yourself sort of going to the Amazon and studying with maybe some indigenous tribes to learn more sort of healing modalities from a particular tradition. What do you think you would have gained that you haven't through your exploration of, for instance, transpersonal psychology? And is that something that you're still sort of looking to explore now?
Absolutely. I mean, I have teenage kids, so the idea of going to Peru for a month, it feels not possible logistically right now in this stage of my family life, but I would love to do that. What I imagine I could have gotten from that or could get from that is working in a paradigm that's just different. Right now it's like, 23 years ago, what is transpersonal? Now it's like, oh yeah, transpersonal. And so most of my career, I've been this like small percentage of the whole working against cognitive behavioral therapy and psychopharmacology and all these medical models. So it's being in the new paradigm before the new paradigm is here yet, and having to be the bridge builder, to bring this new paradigm in, help explain what this means. I had to explain it to my licensing board when I moved to Arkansas. They were like, what? So in indigenous cultures, spirit isn't separate from soul, from symptom. It's a different paradigm. And they've been doing it for eons, without having to have placebo-controlled double-blind research to prove what's happening. They know from eons of experience and however else they know. So there's a lot of wisdom there that hasn't been sort of hijacked by our systems. I don't mean to bash all the Western medicine and science and research. There's a time and a place, and it's wonderful. But it's also, I think, to some degree, can be in the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what makes you such a valuable instructor for us is also just that you are standing in this conjunction between also having this clinical training and what is at the moment the most prolific psychedelic training certification from MAPS. And but you also have this transpersonal lens, which I think in Western psychological system is probably the one that is most likely to some forms of sort of more indigenous understandings and cosmologies. So for those listening who are not familiar with transpersonal psychology, would you be able to just give us a little bit of a brief of what it is and what you sort of learned and how it complements your practice right now?
Great integration challenge for me. I've been trying to articulate that for 20 something years. So one way to make sense of it for me is the blending of spirituality and psychology. Stan Groff is one of the founders of transpersonal psychology, and another way of describing it is trans or beyond the personal. So beyond just me. So what is beyond us? When I think of my suffering, when my friend died when I was little and I couldn't make sense of it, I went up and out, God or whatever, whatever's beyond me, a power higher than ourselves, whatever that means to you. Sometimes whatever, it's too much to bear for my mere mortalness. There's more, so Stan mapped what he called the cartography of the psyche. So there is our biographical narrative, which is what mainstream psychiatry and psychology deals with. But his map includes more than that. So it can also include perinatal. So our birth experience has an impact on our current psyche, perhaps our past lives, perhaps the collective unconscious, or even the cosmos. So there's this much bigger expanse that includes sort of this spiritual realm. Another way I make sense of it is sort of the root word of psyche in Greek actually means soul. So it's not just our brain, our thoughts, our cognitions, but it's something deeper than that. It's something that perhaps, I'm not sure what happens when we die, but I think our consciousness continues. And I think we can access that through these non-ordinary states, like with psychedelics or with breath work or with all kinds of things. And so I think transpersonal psychology gives us the framework and the map to help us understand what there is beyond just, from birth to death.
Beautiful. Thank you for defining that. And I can see that the 20 years of practice have paid off, because I definitely thought that this was a wonderful definition. So I think this could be a potential gateway to sort of talking about boundaries, which was one of our subjects for today, since you are somebody who works one-to-one sessions, and given that you also have this understanding of psychedelics being this tool that enables us to access all these different realms of consciousness that potentially give us information about not just our current lifetime and its imprints, but maybe something about our role in the sort of grander scheme of cosmos, and all these things that are extremely deep and profound and hold such meaning for every individual. And psychedelics are also known as notoriously as boundary dissolving. So it's for each individual to become one with the cosmos, that can be an experience that can happen. And also there's closer bonds formed between people as well. So I wanted to ask you, how do you as a practitioner sort of safeguard yourself and work with this whole concept of boundaries and ensure that you remain separate and contain yourself when you are undergoing these experiences with your clients?
Great. Great question. Huge topic.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So boundaries. where do I end and you begin? And in normal states of consciousness, yeah, we have boundaries between um, interpersonally with others, and these can certainly dissolve in these non-ordinary states. Um, I think boundary work can have a lot of different layers, you know, working with like, how do I say no? When do I say no? You know, what do I need? What do I want? What will I accept? How do I take responsibility for what I need? How do I take responsibility for saying, here's where I begin and end? I think as practitioners and as helpers, you know, we're in session with clients. It's not about us. It's not about our needs. It's about theirs. And I track how I feel inside when they're telling me what's going on. So I'm with myself and I'm tracking myself, but I'm also with them and with their story or their content or their energy. And it can be hard to know what's mine, what's theirs. If I'm suddenly angry, it's like, whoa, what is this? And it might be theirs that they're not feeling, and now I'm feeling it. And then how do I bring that to them? If I'm not consciously tracking, maybe I'm just suddenly angry at them, and I'm like, wait, that's so. I think for me, I've learned to have to actually track my inner knowing. What am I feeling? Even subtly, oh, suddenly my breath just got tight. What's going on here? And then checking with them, how's their breath? You know, and so we can do this dance of like, is this mine? Is this not mine? Um, you know, and I think we can also look for certain tells of where our boundaries might be less healthy. You know, if I know I'm tired and I say yes to a thing, it's like, oh, what am I doing here? Why is this? We might have, that can be a pointer to shadow work, like what's in the way of me actually saying, here's what I need. You know, I don't want to show up tired or compromised to a client who needs my full presence and attention. And so it can be helpful and loving to say, no, I'm not available right now. I will get back to you as soon as I am. And yet we feel pulled where we feel committed and responsibility to our clients that we're committed to. So that, you know, anyway, it can get complicated. And I want to just normalize, this is a tricky place for a lot of us, you know, and again, whatever our developmental history is around how we're able to have boundaries or not can really inform how we show up with our clients. And then, of course, again, if we are working in non-ordinary states, a lot of these boundaries either soften or dissolve. And so I think it can be even more important to have this ability to track and then to track, you know, yeah, if we're in this sort of merged consciousness, how do we make sure we protect, not invading the other person or not abandoning them? You know, how to navigate when the boundaries aren't so clear as to where we begin and end. I think that's quite a complex topic that maybe could be a good topic to add to the Vital curriculum. Lots to unpack there, but I hope I'm beginning to address some of the issues around boundaries there.
Yeah, certainly. We had this year, we had Dan came and he was talking. I mean, his talk was sort of about group dynamics, but then also he covered boundaries a little bit. But I agree, it should be something that should have a whole lecture of its own. Yeah, thank you, Maja, and thanks everyone who wants to chime in the chat. It's certainly, I think what you said about just normalizing it is the first step, because
Yeah.
we also have students who are coming to our retreats, which we have also in this year. It might be that we're just doing breath work, but we have done retreats with psilocybin as well. And then we get this question of like, well, you know, are the facilitators taking any? And our policy has been that no, because we want to essentially show like a very baseline safe paradigm in which people can have experiences and have all their needs met. And we're using the model of breathwork sitter pairs that comes from Stanislav Grof. And whether our students want to explore in the future, taking a little bit of medicine and sort of journeying with another person, that's completely up to them. But obviously, when you are even tiny little bit in the on the medicine yourself, these boundaries get ever more blurry, and your internal integrity and the way in which you hold yourself, those skills need to be further amplified. And I think a lot of people don't have that because it's something that also takes training. And I guess learning how we boundary ourselves is a lifelong learning process. And somebody who works in a role of a therapist might have more of an understanding, but a layperson is maybe not equipped, because we also, a lot of people grow up since childhood, and if there is boundary violations in childhood, you grow up without maybe even realizing that your boundaries are constantly violated and that you might be violating other people's boundaries without even realizing it. And it takes quite a lot of work to get to that stage. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe from there, we can also talk a little bit more about your training with somatic experiencing and these other types of tools. You also have some understanding of IFS, and like how are you implementing these into your practice, and how, if you want to relate them more specifically to this topic of boundaries, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I am a little bit obsessive and I love trainings. So I've done lots of trainings every chance I get. Probably some of the biggest ones that have Sematic Experiencing, which is really at least a 3-year program. And then I'm studying IFS. I'm just getting ready to finally start an actual formal IFS training. Somatic Experiencing is one of the places that I learned about boundaries in a different way. And I did recognize subtle energetic boundary violations that I didn't realize had been happening, that feel normal and comfortable because that's what I'm used to. But actually, so Somatic Experiencing is a trauma-informed model of care that works with the nervous system and the body. And so when we have trauma, and there's lots of different capital T index trauma, developmental trauma, legacy trauma, there's lots of different ways we can experience too much or being overwhelmed or being harmed. And learning to recognize we have a natural physiological response to threat. If something's threatening us, if we're getting chased by a tiger, our nervous system below our conscious mind is going to send out a stress response, adrenaline, cortisol. It's going to mobilize our large muscles so we can run away from that tiger. We don't need to digest now. We don't need to reproduce now. We'll do that later. If we survive, let's survive. So I'm doing this with my body so you can see these are some of the things you can learn to subtly track. If I'm working with somebody and suddenly their hands start to do this, clench, or, it's like, oh, what's going, let's get some movement there. So sometimes we have these protective responses that didn't get to express or didn't get to complete. And so we can help people move that energy that may have been stuck in their nervous system from an incomplete survival response. And then it can be much more subtle than that. So we were in one of our modules where we were talking about developmental trauma and interpersonal boundary, like being merged or blended with others, and how it's like, I don't have my actual self. I just have to be at the mercy of these people around me. And all of a sudden I felt this like slow, kind of churny, angry feeling in my gut. And I was like, what is this? And so we learned how to work with like, okay, no, this is my space. This is where I begin and end. And it comes from the belly. And then we come out through the arms to like physically create boundaries in our space. So then I noticed all these relationships where I was formed in I'm just following them, you know, and I started to have better boundaries in my relationships. And that was hard on those relationships. So anyway,
Mm,
sharing a little bit about how in that modality, for example, there's lots of different ways of working with boundaries and how we protect our individuation.
mm,
And a lot of it is physiological. It can be below our conscious awareness. We can bring it into our conscious awareness and then do different behaviors.
mm.
Um,
Beautiful.
yeah. IFS, internal family systems. This is a system of working with parts and self. Very popular these days. It's pairs really well with psychedelics. So if you're interested in this field, that's a great modality to learn more about. Great books that are available for just learning more about it. Um, Part of how I've worked with parts and boundaries is finding the exiled parts. So a part that I somewhere in childhood learned it's actually not okay to be loud or angry or say no. You know, maybe, I don't know, maybe it was disruptive in my preschool class to yell or be mad at something. So I learned if I'm socially acceptable, which I need to be, I better keep that to myself. So we can sort of find these exile parts and say, actually, it's safe. You can say no, you can speak up, you can even yell and scream sometimes if you need to. So there are ways of sort of finding our what's in the way of healthy boundaries or healthy assertiveness with protector parts, and then heal the exiles, let them get updated into real time. Actually, it is safe, and you can do that and still be socially acceptable usually. So there's a
Mm.
lot more to unpack there, but just, you know, a snippet of how that modality can work.
Yes, yeah. And we actually have Dick Schwartz, who is the inventor of the IFS method, as one of our lecturers. So we're very fortunate to be able to actually have him come live, and then students can ask questions. Um, so there's some questions in the chat, and maybe this could be a way that we can start looking at some of those. And there was a question around what books you might recommend around IFS. I don't know if you have any that come to mind.
Absolutely. So No Bad Parts is a fairly new book. I love it. If you get the audiobook, it has Dick Schwartz actually reading. So there's several experiential exercises in there as well. I also like just the introduction to IFS. And then for couples, there's a great one. I recommend this one all the time. You Are the One You've Been Waiting For.
Mm,
Fantastic. Whether you're in a relationship romantically or not, it's really about relational dynamics. We often unconsciously expect others to take care of our parts, and that's not wrong. We are interconnected and interdependent, but ultimately we can be the primary caretakers of our own parts, and then our partner can be the secondary caretaker if they're available and resourced. But if not, we can also be okay. So it's I love that one.
great recommendations. Thank you so much. Yeah. So feel free to check out IFS and find out more about these books. I'm very curious. I mean, I've read parts of the No Bad Parts, but I've been meaning to get much more into it. And as I also run the live classes for Jung course, which is part of Vital, and you can take it as an elective. So we have 2 rounds of electives during both winter and summertime, and we're just doing the classes now. And we had one yesterday where we were talking that it's a very Jungian lens as well, through which, like, through shadow work, you essentially come to accept all parts of yourself, and you bring light to the parts that are maybe how you have been shunning away, but that the wholeness of personality, it really doesn't consist of perfection, but of this sort of acceptance and allowance of all these different parts to exist. So there's a certain parallel there for sure.
Very, very.
So yeah, there was a couple of quite interesting questions. Maybe we can start with this one, since it's kind of closer to the projection part that we were just talking about. So Lara is asking, can you share how you prep yourself before a session to help with what you are discussing? Possible entanglement, projection, and feeling entities in session, as this can occur also frequently.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do a lot of preparation work. I can talk about preparation in general. I work with ketamine in my practice. I don't work with other medicines that aren't legal yet. And I know, first of all, I love that you're naming entanglement and projection, because I think this is a really important framework, and this is something I talk about in prep. Entities is a whole nother topic, and I'm going to put a pin in that and hopefully get back around to that. But yeah, I think first of all, in general prep, I start with, I want to hear their intentions, for what they're wanting to get from this. And, I think the journey begins when someone has that initial call to action. I begin to sort of map out the territory in my mind, and in sharing that with them. Here's what we might expect and what we might go through. You're going to have this anticipatory time leading up. You're going to have your journey. The journey is going to be what it is. Then you're going to have this process after, and then we're going to work on making sense and integration. Here's a little bit about what to expect from your particular medicine that you're going to be working with. And also expecting there may be what we call nonlinear healing. A system craves stability, a family system or an internal system, or in physics systems. So as we go through changes, it requires a certain amount of chaos, a certain amount of loss of what was, so that we can get to what's coming. And in the meantime, that can be disorienting or destabilizing. So we really want to talk about that and prepare for that possibility. And then we can get into, and what are your resources? What are your internal resources for coping with that? What's your support system? What's our emergency contingency plan? If needed, we sort of have this triage way of building resources and support available. And then we practice letting go. Here's some navigational tools or skills for when you're in the medicine space. Our egos, again, that we resist the change, we resist the control, letting go of. So practicing that, maybe some breath work, some mantras or whatever. There's lots of different tools in the toolkit for helping somebody prepare, and tailoring it to their specific intention, their specific nervous system, trauma history, medicine that they might work with. If we're working together with ketamine, there's some specific tools for how to navigate ketamine. I think entities is a really important and curious question, especially I think for if you're working with ayahuasca. And again, I haven't done a fellowship in Peru. I don't know how to do that yet. I've heard about it. I'm concerned about it. That's one reason I won't sit with people with that medicine. I don't know how to handle that. In IFS, it's also a topic. It's not taught until the advanced year for a similar reason. So those of you that are going to be doing this work, I think it's, again, put it as sort of, that's maybe specific training. And also knowing, again, in the cartography of the psyche, there's some weird stuff that can happen, that doesn't make sense in this plane. What if there's a dead relative that visits, or a blue man, or a exorcist? There's things that sound potentially woo-woo, but I think we're opening up to the cosmos. There's lots of potential consciousness out there, and there are people that know how to do that, perhaps. So I think for me, addressing a caution of, we don't know what we don't know. And I do think that is within the realm of possibility. So,
Yeah. And I think there is also that, just to remind oneself that people's experiences are so different. So you also don't want to be bringing anything into somebody's experience that wouldn't have been there otherwise, which is why it is so extremely complicated trying to
yeah,
frame what might happen to anybody.
right.
Um,
Yeah, there's a heightened suggestibility when people are in non-ordinary states. So if they say, "Hey, I saw this thing," we don't want to say, "Oh, I know what that was." We want to be with their experience and say, "Tell me more. What was that like for you? What's coming up for you around this?" Unless you have some really specific, well, I'm not even going to say unless. I think that's I'll leave that there.
yeah. Thank you for those. That's really amazing.
Can I
So
speak to the question about the couples work?
yes, 100%.
Um, so MDMA is not legal currently. It looks promising that it's about to be, but in the early research and practice with it before it was illegal, it was used beautifully as a tool for couples work. I'm not a sex therapist, and I know people are, but even besides the sexual aspect of couples intimacy, I think it's a beautiful tool for increasing empathy and compassion and connection and lowering whatever's in the way of that. So I cannot wait until MDMA is an FDA approved medicine that we have access to and we can use it for couples work again. Um, so I know in the underground it's used that way all the time, and I'm really excited for when we get to do that again. I think it's a beautiful tool.
Yeah, thank you. Kevin, you posed this question about like efficacy of psychedelic medicine with disparaging couples. I don't know exactly what that is. What do you mean by that? That's a little bit further up in the chat, at around 5:08.
Like
And
couples that are in conflict, or
yeah,
like,
I guess so. So I guess for that one also you would probably think about MDMA.
mhm.
Um,
I've also used ketamine with couples, and in a similar way, it sort of softens some of the ego defenses. So again, if we think of parts, we might have protector parts. Hey, I grew up being annoyed by my brother, and you remind me of my brother, so I'm gonna have this projection of this inner experience. Ketamine helps soften these ego defenses. So now it's like, oh, let me just be with you as you instead of who I think you are because of a projection. So that's one way. And yeah.
mm. And then Maja here had a question about sort of appropriateness in the space. So she's asking, is it appropriate and acceptable to only work with one gender to reduce sexual inappropriateness? Say I identify as hetero female and I would like to facilitate for non-male identifying persons. I have noticed when I have facilitated in the past, some clients have made me uncomfortable with the level of sexuality and direction they have towards me while I'm holding space for them. I don't know if you would like to speak on that one.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's not weird at all. I think this is a very relevant
Mm,
issue. And I think it depends on who you're sitting with and what they need. And I think it also depends on how you feel. I think there's a time and a place where um, same identification can be helpful. Again, it really depends on the trauma history or what people need or want or feel safe with. Um, Sometimes it matters. I can certainly name things like if there's been sexual abuse or sexual violence and violations, um, um, as female identifying people who have been perpetrated by males. I know that can happen in other ways, but um, again, the projection of that can be hard to feel safe sitting with a male. So that's one example of how I think that can be something to be really sensitive to. So it's really important. And it's not always, it's there's all kinds of things that can happen in transference. So again, if we really want to get into things about transference and projections, we can put things on people that can be, oh, this is actually helpful to work through if there's enough safety and enough sense of safety. But that relative safety or relative sense of safety can be a really foundational need for somebody to go into the work they need to do.
Yeah, so well said. And I think another thing, just in following up from your question, is that that's why we also are talking about boundaries and things like this, because a lot of these conflicts are sexual in nature, and it's extremely important to have conversations around it. Yes. And if you have any kind of uncomfortability around this as a female, for instance, it's totally fine just to work with women. Actually, it's so beautiful to create only women identifying spaces and only male identifying spaces. And I think that these containers are really in service of the whole as well. But if you feel comfortable working with both sexes, that's fine. But yeah, I wouldn't expect everybody to feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more thing I'll say, I talked to a lot of people that are doing psychedelics in underground spaces, and there are different groups that have different rules or structures around this. And one group that I'm aware of has these rules at the beginning. They say erotic energy is wonderful and beautiful and welcome, but there's no physical expression of it allowed in the group space. Period. So those are good boundaries. We know where we begin and end. I can feel this, but I'm not going to physically act on it in a way that could cause harm or discomfort for somebody else in the group space. There are other groups who do it differently. And so, these are really good things to learn and to think about and to make decisions about if you're going to do this work, how. And there are different options, and what do you want and need, or what do your participants want or need for safety?
Yeah. And I think overall also sort of basic common sense in terms of that, because people are in very highly charged states, maybe just wearing slightly more covering top that day and loose pants, not because I think that that's how women should dress, but just because maybe there's ways in which also you can exist as a facilitator where you're not drawing attention to those particular attributes of your body at that particular time. And I think most people who have done facilitation for a long time would probably agree with that. And I mean, same goes for men, to be honest, but I guess this is more of a thing that is focused on like male gaze. So there was quite an interesting question and quite a general one, but I thought this would be a fun one to answer. So what are the most important skills or qualities for a facilitator to cultivate?
Oh, great question. I think first and foremost, I'm going to say, do your own work, know yourself. And that might mean your own psychotherapy. That might mean your own medicine work, your own shadow work. Learn yourself, learn your strengths, learn your challenges, and learn your blind spots, which are inherently blinded. How do we make light of our shadow? Tools, support. I could go on, but naming that. And then again, my bias comes from a therapist perspective. And I talk to a lot of young therapists entering the field, and they're like, I want to learn psychedelics. And I'm like, great, do the basics first. Come to me in 2 years. And so learning, how do you sit with people? How do you do reflective listening? How do you track your own nervous system? How do we assess? How do we know when we need to have more concern or more support or more intervention? There's a lot of basics to learn. And then you add this complexity of non-ordinary states of consciousness and expanded states. So I could keep going. I know we're getting close to time. So doing your own work is probably the most bang for your buck. Basic either counseling or facilitation skills. I think Vital is a good place to learn that. If you're not doing a full sort of graduate track program, finding a place where you can do your own work. Yeah, anything else, Johanna, that comes to mind for you?
I think those were the most important ones, really. But yeah, just having some kind of energetic tools. Essentially, meditation is really one that you cannot really get away from during this work. So some kind of meditation practice, even if it just means 10 minutes a day, or even if it just means 30 minutes 3 times a week, whatever sort of suits you. But finding the way to just observe your mind instead of reacting immediately, because that's definitely something that you're going to need as a skill in the facilitation space. And yeah, the inner work component is it cannot be undermined, because you are the conduit of the experience also when you are with somebody else. So the medicine is doing its work, but you are creating the container. So it is, and Mike Sapiro speaks about this very beautifully, who Angie has been teaching with for over 2 years now. It's that it's our awareness that contributes to the whole. So I guess being mindful of that fact.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, and by shadow work, I think our awareness is our tool, our presence is our tool. If our awareness is filtered by our own inner experience, we're gonna see it not as it is, but as we are. So again, it's like an invisible thing. We think we're seeing what we're seeing, but we're seeing it again filtered through our own inner place. So having practices that help us go in and sort of clean this up, I think it's a lifelong process.
Certainly. And having community and accountability buddies, which is also where Vital can come in very handy, because what we're trying to do here is to build this mycelial network of psychedelic practitioners that can help and serve one another in various ways. So maybe for the last 10 minutes, we can talk a little bit about sort of, well, try to answer some of these questions in the chat, but then also maybe talk about sort of your mentorship role, and how it has been for you to be like an instructor for us, and what the study groups are like and all that. But maybe let's start with some questions here. So Miguel is asking, what training or resource would you recommend for a preclinical cannabinoid researcher transitioning to clinical psychedelic studies? Well, a training like Vital could be very useful for you if you want to actually just not just have like learning about the clinical sphere, but also understand psychedelics as a general, and also do a little bit of this, as mentioned, inner work in the process. I don't know if you want to continue with research based on this question, or if you are planning to become a clinician, because maybe that's then something that Angie can speak to a little bit more. As in, like, if there's some kind of trainings that you would recommend for somebody who is going towards clinical psychedelic studies. I guess what you mentioned already, IFS, somatic experiencing.
Yeah. Are you wanting to transition to clinical cannabis psychedelic practice, or I mean, training resources, obviously we're biased towards Vital. And there are others. If you're speaking specifically about cannabis, I know Daniel McQueen is one of the mentors in the field, elders in the field, who has done cannabis specific psychedelic ceremonies. And he's trained a lot of people now. So now a lot of people are offering that. And I mean, there are lots of other trainings as well. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm quite fully getting how to answer that question.
I think it's okay. Maybe Miguel, if you have like a specification on like what kind of things that you're looking for, then maybe you can pop it in the chat.
Uh,
But maybe we'll go for the next
yeah,
question
one
here.
more. Let me take one more pass. When I first applied to be a MAPS therapist for their phase 3 trial, they said, no, Arkansas is not going to be one of our trial sites, but get ready. This will be legal eventually, we hope. And so take all the trauma trainings you can. So I've done EMDR, I've done brain spotting. I worked with Polaris, which is a ketamine specific training. I did a ketamine training center CAP plus IFS blend, which was one of the most powerful trainings I've ever done in my life. I got to do the MAPS MDMA training. I feel like a Vital student as an instructor because I get to go through it. Vital has been like it's integrated all of that for me. Every week you get to hear from one of these experts. You'll get to hear from Dick Schwartz from IFS. You'll get to hear from Sematic Experiencing practitioners. And so every week you get to hear from somebody with this expertise, these expertises. And then you get a study group to process it and digest it and integrate it with. So keep looking, whatever training you're drawn to, take it. There's tons of them. And
Mm.
it's very comprehensive. So
Yeah, 100%. And I just thought to add to that um for me now, just sort of talking about this whole process of how you find your path in the psychedelic field, networking is obviously really important, but also psychedelic field as a whole is not just some kind of coherent bundle. It's kind of like, what are you most interested in and how can you incorporate psychedelics to that? So I see that there's somebody asking about psychodynamic psychotherapy. I'm sure that would be amazing working with psychedelics. I actually don't know many psychodynamic practitioners. I know more of the Jungian people because that's what I'm interested in. But Vital is also this sort of patchwork of different types of professionals who have their own unique passion and role that they're playing in the field. And that's how they're able to come and lecture because they've spent years and years on studying their particular modality. And through Vital, a lot of people either they find like a modality or a practice that really resonates with them, or maybe they deeper their experience with it, or maybe they just incorporate a few. So that's also something that I wanted to mention about like what we really offer here.
yeah, let me jump in. I know we're close on time. My story about how I got here. So after fast forward, and then 2017, I heard about the MAPS conference. And so I just went. And from there, that opened up everything for me. So I encourage you to go to conferences to connect with the others, find the others. And you get to hear, of course, all the researchers and lecturers, but you may meet somebody in line at the bathroom or on the cab ride to the thing, or and that's where I've met who has now become my community and my teachers. And I got to meet Johanna last year at a conference in person. And so I encourage that. It's important to have community and network. I also have a peer consult group that I'm in. This work has been in the shadow. It's been illegal and underground. So if we are struggling with a case, whoops, I may have had a misstep here. I hope I didn't cause harm. It's hard to talk about that because what the people that are working underground, what they're doing is illegal. So we need to have peer support, a place where we can be supported and be held accountable so that we don't accidentally cause harm. So we need a network. We need peer support. Again, Vital, our study group cohorts is one place where we get to really learn and connect and meet the others that can be that with us.
Thank you
And I
so
would say psychodynamics, yes. I think any type of therapy can be catalyzed with psychedelic work. My basic brief synopsis of psychodynamic is making the unconscious conscious. So it's not unlike what we're talking about here with shadow work. And every training I've done, I just got to train for a clinical trial working with 5-MeO-DMT, and they're applying specific elements of acceptance and commitment therapy as part of the prep and integration. So you can take just about any modality. All the trials are like, well, let's use a little of this. There's this basic how we do it, and then you can add in bits. So whatever your lens is, that could potentially also apply to psychedelic work, I believe.
And here I really wanted to mention also to Ryan's question that this PsyVital is not just for licensed practitioners, and actually Vital is not only just for practitioners either. It's also for people who are just looking to learn more about psychedelics. One of our students referred Vital as like a liberal arts training in psychedelics. So we have history, we have philosophy, we have psychology, and while we are geared towards therapists and mental health practitioners, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, architects, interior designers. We have people who are working in media, who are, yoginis or some kind of somatic practitioners. We have people who are also not necessarily planning to build a career of psychedelics, but they're also just wanting to learn. And therefore, it really is, we look at every person case by case basis. So while we would really love for you to have some kind of experience in a kind of a caring role so that you're prepared for the retreats where you will have the sitting experience, it's also not an absolute requirement. So we really look at your motivation and your passion and your personal statement, essentially.
Yep.
And there was a question about the graduation requirements. So you can miss the Tuesday sessions. That's fine. We would love for you to be there for the most part, but if it doesn't work with your schedule, we have students who cannot attend those. What we really need you to attend is the weekly study group, which is an hour and a half, and you can pick a time slot that works for your schedule. And then we really expect you to turn up for that one because it's a very integral part of the training. And then in addition, we organized a number of retreats in the US and at least one this year in Europe as well. They're probably more likely to be breath work this time around. But yeah, we would love for you to come to one of our retreats and to learn the modality and to actually meet us in person. If you're really prohibited in terms of travel or cost or something, we also have other alternatives. And then we have 2 assignments during the year that are also part of the requirement. Sorry, I'm just like speaking here because I wanted to get that in. So we are almost at the end here. Thank you so much for everybody who joined. And Angie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And sorry to everyone whose questions we didn't get to. So for questions about Vital, you can email us at vitalpsychedelicstoday.com. And we'll get back to you as soon as possible. The applications close on 21st of December. And Angie, do you have anything that you want to close with?
It's been great to be here. Thanks for having me. I think one last thing I'll plug is my nonprofit, the Holos Foundation, holosfound.org. We are the fiscal sponsors for Vital. So Vital's scholarship program, if you would like to make a donation, go to holosfound.org, tax deductible, and it comes through Holos, but it's for specifically earmarked for the Vital Scholarship. So this helps allow accessibility. I know this is a big investment, and it really helps support access to this training. So check it out if you would like to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for being our charity, so that we can actually offer these scholarships to our students and also for the retreats. So it's been lovely, and everyone who has any questions, you can find the email link in the chat. I'm also going to drop here a link to our YouTube video in case you haven't seen it, if you want to have like a little bit more of an overview. And yes, there will be a recording that will be sent to you. Yes, looking forward to hearing from you all. Have a very blessed day. And yeah, see you next time.
Bye.
Okay.